on posting back to that controller. So now the generic topics of process scripting, request forgery, and SQL injection are covered a bit. So we talk about the bugs Rails or the Ruby on Rails way. So Rails comes with a lot of fancy stuff which might go wrong because it just makes, it helps you being lazy. You can describe something in just one line of code which just gives you, for instance, protection from process forgery or validate that the name is given as unique. So first part of AutoMagic is mass assignments. Yeah, if we got a user and this user could have a name, we would have an assignment like user of name is chunky bacon. This is typically saved with, we take the whole user parameter, which also can be this keyed hash, and then save all this hash. So all other parameters would also be saved with it. It would look like this. If we don't only post user name, we also post user admin, we might gain admin access to a website. This is a common error in Rails applications. So the CCC website did it wrong. There was, if you had a user account, you could promote yourself to be an admin if you just post the admin flag with it. So this is how they fixed it. They looked up, we delete admin unless the user itself is admin. That would disable regular user promoting himself to admin. There's a much more cleaner way to prevent this stuff of this bug class of mass assignments. It has to be fixed in the model. As an example from Redmine, say my user class has protected attributes, login, admin, and whatever I don't want to be tampered with automatically. Another thing, speaking of lazy developers, yeah, if you have a model and it's perfectly fine and authenticated and everything is checked in one controller, you might introduce a second controller where you were a bit lazy and forgot some checks. Such a thing would be what happened to Redmine with their journals info leak, which I discovered late last year. They were just leaking information about issues submitted to a private project just by missing the 5th line of code, the authorize before filter on certain control certain methods of this controller. So yeah, again, you should read all layers of a Rails application to get an overview of it. So if you look at the model and it looks fine, it's not mass assignable, maybe they forgot something in the controller accessing this model, which then might blow up in your face. So now there's more than just the model of your controller code in wherever your Rails app live. Our libraries, vendor plugins is basically the same as libraries that are RubyGem, which will be installed, for instance, and they're helpless. And of course, there's Ruby on Rails code itself, which might not be bug-free. So one example from Redmine. This is controller for the software repository, where you can have your SVN or CVS repository and display it nicely on a web page with the functionality of being able to div certain revisions against each other. So what it does here, before filter would be find repository. The exception we don't care about because we look at the div functionality. So find repository will get in line 6 the parameter which is called ref, and prepare it for you and fill out the right repository, then you go into div, the before filter has happened, and the format given is div. So its format is div. We div path revision and revision 2, which also gets filled out in find repository. So rev2 and rev will get out there. So if we look at the library which handles the diffing with the specific repository controller, for instance, if we look at the bazaar repository controller, what it does, this is a function called in the slide before the actual actual diffing function or method. So yeah, basically identifier from is taken and put in here with identifier 2, and it divs revision identifier 2 to identifier from, and here we got a simple command injection because it just would execute that command and do not escape any shell meta characters. So here we have command execution in Redmine prior to version 104, I think. And there's also a Metasploit module for it around, which I gave out as a Christmas present last year. This is how to understand that. So another thing I came up with, I had to assemble the vendor a bit. Yeah, it's another open source Rails app, and they didn't fix the bug yet. So maybe if you look around a bit for the source code, except I show you later, you might figure out who did it wrong. So first of all, this application looked very suspicious to me because they heavily used send statements, but on unfiltered user input. And what send does is, if you give it a symbol, which could also be a string and argument, it will take symbol, the string as a method name, and call this with passing it the argument specified. So it's a way of indirection in Ruby, which also allows private methods to be called. Yeah, what they did in the controllers, I didn't find anything directly exploitable because they mainly had send on user input without any argument, so I couldn't really make use of it. But then I found a search helper library which did the same. So you posted it like search condition value, and then they somehow fill out condition and value and look if it's array, nicely put it all back together. And then they send condition and value, which are both user given. So yeah, then you go search for instance evil, which is another version of evil in scope of the current instance, and give it something like backtick touch DRP / command exec backtick, and just do that get request. You will get command execution due to yeah, this indirection in Rails. So but this example I want to show you, you have a bit to know about the Ruby internals to spot such bugs. And if you do Metasploit framework update in the next couple of days or weeks when they fix it, there will pretty sure be an exploit for that application ready. Yeah. So Rails itself, I for myself didn't look too deep into it yet, but yeah, a friend of mine did, Felix Rivert from Google security team. He looked at cross-site request forgery tokens, and as I said before, there's some magic which should protect you. This failed until beginning of this year because yeah, we go through the code because they messed something up. So he found it in CVE 2011-0447, fixed in red 304. So let's look how this worked. We get the nicely named Ruby file request forgery protection. In line 1, we look if the request has to be verified, and so basically if it's not protected against forgery, and if it's whitelisted, or if the token is the right token, it gets passed. It's a verified request. So this whitelisting looks a bit interesting. Whitelisting is if it's a GET request, because GET isn't supposed to change states in Ruby on Rails at all. If it's like a XHR, so it's a XML HTTP post, like a AJAX post. If the MIME type is null, or the MIME type is not it's not like what has to be verified in line 6, the lower line. So we look at this. So if the request is verified, if the not browser generated types will put into the Rails application, so that would be HTML, URL encoded form, or multi-part form text. By this, putting it all together, we can have a generic CSR protection bypass. And that way, to do a proof of concept for it, get Redmine, I posted to my site with Flash, and I've made it having it content type, which would partly check application JSON. And then I let my Flash being redirected 307, so I guess it's temporary redirection to my target. Supply a proper JSON parameter for creating a new user, and the authenticity token, which would be the token in the Rails application, which has to be checked, won't be checked because I'm going with the right content type. So if I just have to set it to an arbitrary string. In Firefox, you will get a pop-up on this redirection, which you have to do because you want to fill around the header. You have to use Flash. But with Chrome, for me at least, at the end of last year, it still worked like flawlessly. So if you want information about the cross-domain post-header manipulation via Flash redirect, there's a URL with slides which you can look up. That's a mailing list post describing the issue more in detail. But basically, yeah, the Ruby on Rails Spark persisted until the beginning of this year, and Felix found it and was kind enough to let me explain it a bit to you. So another big thing